Avdiivka continues to be the center of attention in Ukraine. Russia is gaining ground south of Avdiivka and appears to be content in plain defense north of town after capturing the landfill, the towers over the city. Ukraine is counterattacking, but they are also forced to transfer reserves and equipment from the southern front. Ukraine is putting up a ferocious defense of Avdiivka and are inflicting losses on the Russians, but this is overshadowed by very shaky international support due to implosion of the situation in the Middle East. Ukrainian military and monetary support, while still trickling in, has taken a massive hit in the American sphere as the U.S. is long overdue in passing a new aid package for Ukraine. The recent ascension of Republican Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House, the third most powerful position in the U.S. government, raises doubt that a new funding package will ever be passed, as Mike Johnson has never voted in favor of Ukraine funding going back to the start of the war in 2022 and could easily block any Ukrainian bill from reaching the House floor. All of this in today's Frontline report. Before we get started, I have an important announcement. I was speaking to a friend the other day who asked me why the channel was called New World Economics when I never talk about economics, and I thought, what a great point. That was originally the name because I have a degree in economics and it was my intention to start a vlog on the topic. Instead, I started covering the Ukraine war and the name caught on with the audience. So for the sake of accuracy, I have rebranded the channel once again and changed the name to New World Geopolitics. I think this name makes more sense and hopefully you agree. I am starting to cover other geopolitical events outside of the war in Ukraine, and I am hoping to reach new audiences with that. So please visit my channel and check out these videos. I posted a video the other day on the history of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and I need help beating the algorithm, so consider watching that video. And if you don't care, then I don't know, maybe open it in a new tab and mute it or something. I'm not above cheating the YouTube algorithm, so thanks for the help there. As always, please consider hitting both the like and subscribe buttons. Of course, this is free for you to do, but helps me immensely in keeping the channel running. I also have to contest with a growing censorship regime that is plaguing Western nations and often results in limited reach for my content. So if you would like to support me directly, please consider donating either through the PayPal link in the description or via the Superchat feature in the comments. But do not feel obligated to do so. This content is free for you to consume, but at the very least consider leaving a comment with your feedback or ideas for future videos. Thanks to all of you that have donated so far. It does not go unnoticed and it is highly appreciated. The Russian assault on Avdiivka has slowed somewhat since the initial advance, but in the last week there have been a number of noteworthy developments. First off, we have seen the presence of Ukrainian Leopard 2 tanks, with 3 to 4 of them apparently being confirmed as destroyed by mainstream media in the last week. This seems to confirm that Ukraine is transferring some of their troops from the Zaporozhye region to the Avdiivka front to aid in defense. When it comes to frontline changes, in the south, the Russians are expanding their control over eastern Vadian and are engaging with Ukrainian forces in that area. Possibly the biggest development of the week, Russian forces have recaptured the rock quarry just north of Opitny, along with a number of tree lines and trenches. The fall of this position, combined with the capture of the landfill north of town, severely degrades Ukraine's position in Avdiivka. Just a short hop to the west, Russia is also gaining ground on a long-time Ukrainian base, which has been Ukraine's main central base of operations, covering the direction of the Donetsk airport all the way back to 2014. In the forested areas of Avdiivka, Russia is claiming advances on Ukrainian fortifications and the filtration plant, but this information I believe is less reliable, so I have not mapped out anything yet. North of town, Russia has taken on a defensive stance for the most part, as Ukraine is attempting to take back the landfill mound and force the Russians back from Krasnogorovka. This is perhaps the best strategy for Ukraine if they are to hold Avdiivka. Allowing the Russians to get entrenched on the landfill will slowly degrade Ukrainian logistics and responsiveness and could force Ukraine out of Avdiivka, similar to the result of the Battle of Bakhmut. Moving to the Kherson region, there are not many updates here. There is information that Ukraine is reinforcing the bridgehead across the river and meeting engagements are taking place, but Russia has so far failed to force back the Ukrainians. In Zaporizhia, clashes are still taking place along the section of the first Russian defense line that Ukraine managed to breach. There is some combat footage coming from this area in the last week of destroyed Leopards and destroyed Russian tanks, but the scale of these clashes is no longer that of a large offensive nature. Russian sources are claiming that the Ukrainian 47th Brigade, which was one of the better trained NATO equipped brigades, has been transferred out of the region to Avdiivka. This is possibly some of the footage we've seen of Leopard tanks on the battlefield in Avdiivka, as they were there were some of those tanks present in the 47th Brigade unit. Battles continue to take place near Novomihailovka to the northeast of town, with some claims from the Russians that advances have been made, but nothing that I can map out as of yet. North of Marinka, there was a large Russian assault that took place recently that supposedly took several fields and fortifications in the direction of Krasnogorovka. This was reported actually by the military summary channel, but I am unsure of its sources, and I did not see the information on this myself. So once again, I am not mapping it out. I recommend going to his channel for more information. In the Bakhmut area, there actually is some activity. Ukraine is assaulting Russian lines near Klishivka, and Russia has recaptured some ground west of Bakhmut. And finally, in the area near Kupiansk, there are some clashes in the farmlands east of the city, but once again, there are no mappable gains here. This is actually one of the quieter fronts in terms of information in the last week. So finally, just to talk a bit about the political situation in the context of the Hamas assault on Israel and the subsequent Israeli invasion of Gaza that just began in the last 2 days, the Western nations are very distracted, and the focus appears to be moving away from Ukraine. Beef between Israel and Gaza alone would not be enough to do this. A deeper issue has emerged. Israel's response to the breach of their borders has been to institute a bombing campaign. And since Gaza is the most densely populated territory on Earth, and closed borders with a blockade means civilians have nowhere to go, predictably, many innocent civilians have been killed. This appears to have enraged the Arab world outside of the context of Iran, which appears to have played a hand in the assault to begin with. Muslim peoples living in countries with governments even friendly to the U.S., such as Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, are starting to place a lot of pressure on their leaders to stop the killing. Since Israel is unlikely to budge on the diplomatic front, military action would be a possible path of achieving this. To prevent any parties in the Middle East from interfering in the Israel-Hamas fight, the U.S. has stationed 3 aircraft carriers in the region, 2 super carriers, and 1 amphibious assault ship, the USS Baton, which is equivalent in size to a smaller jump carrier, as they call it. Although the Baton is not a jump carrier, it can carry fighter jets. This is 2 out of 11 and 1 out of 10 of the total of each of these types of carriers in the U.S. Navy that are supposed to patrol the global oceans, and it's a significant percentage of the U.S. naval firepower. So it is clear that for the moment, the most powerful military in the world has redirected its attention away from the Russo-Ukraine war. This does not mean Ukraine isn't still receiving support, because it is. I believe the other day, something like $100 or $150 million worth of military equipment were sent to Ukraine, which might seem like a lot, but based on the numbers we're about to go over, it seems like it's somewhere around like maybe 2.5 weeks worth of military worth of ammunition for Ukraine. It's just not receiving the same levels of support as it was during the summer offensive. This is likely going to be detrimental to the battle for Avdiivka or possibly other sectors of the front. Another factor is U.S. spy satellites, which have likely been redirected to observing various parties throughout the Middle East, which have engaged U.S. forces several times over the last week. That's the battles we've heard about in Iraq and Syria taking place between U.S. troops and various different Arab militias on the ground. Finally, there's the issue of Ukraine funding itself. In 2022, Ukraine spent $44 billion on military expenditures through 10 months of war and 2 months of peace, and will likely have an even higher spending rate by the end of 2023. Over half of Ukraine's budget is being spent on their military, and this is heavily subsidized by loans from the US and the EU. Ukraine also has to import goods and pay out massive sums in pensions in order to prevent economic collapse. So 2 spending categories also subsidized by the West. It has now been weeks since a $60 billion package to fund Ukraine through 2024 was proposed and failed to make it through Congress under the previous Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, who was ousted. Congress was deadlocked for several weeks as bills cannot be brought to the floor for a vote without a speaker, and now that Republican Mike Johnson has landed the position, it seems very unlikely that Ukraine will get the full funding needed in order to stay afloat through 2024. Mike Johnson has not voted for a single cent of U.S. taxpayer money to go to Ukraine since the first bill came to the floor in March of 2022. It is possible that in the name of negotiation, he does allow a bill to reach the floor only to vote against it and retain his record of not voting for Ukraine funding, but it is also possible that he blocks Ukraine funding from even reaching the floor altogether. The most recent proposal from the White House packages a Ukraine funding bill along with an Israel funding bill, a Hawaiian disaster relief funding package, and funding for border security. A smart move politically, as many Republicans do support all 4 of these initiatives, or each one individually. However, there's much dissent from members of each party for individual aspects of the bill. Certain Republicans support Israel funding, but not Ukraine funding. Republicans really don't seem to have a reason to support Hawaiian disaster relief outside of the fact it has been a good political angle for them to talk about it so far. And of course, Republicans very much care about border security. So, it does put them in a bit of a bind. Congress also does need to pass a funding bill for the U.S. government, which will cease operations without it. And the issue is that all of this needs to be debated in the House of Representatives before the winter government recess periods. So between November 18th and 26th and December 16th and January 2nd, the government leaves Washington, D.C. and goes back to their home states for the holidays. So both bills would need to make it through Congress. Probably the government funding bill needs to be handled before November 18th, so that's going to take precedent. And then perhaps Congress will debate a Ukraine funding bill between the 26th of November and December 16th. So that's what's going on with that. That is all for this week's update on the Ukraine war. This week I will be posting a prediction on the outcomes of the war. Thanks again for joining, and until next time.